Picture this: you walk into the most expensive restaurant in the city, expecting to be served by perfectly trained staff. But what if the person you assumed was just clearing tables was actually the one who built the entire empire? What if the woman you barely noticed in her simple uniform was the mastermind behind a multi-million-dollar business? Sometimes, the most powerful people in the room are the ones we never see coming. This is the story of Maria Santos, a woman who let everyone underestimate her, until the moment she didn't. Maria Santos wiped her hands on her apron and glanced at the clock hanging above the kitchen door. 7:30 in the morning, and the restaurant was already buzzing with activity. She had been up since 4, checking deliveries, reviewing the daily menu, and making sure every detail was perfect. To anyone watching, she looked like just another kitchen worker preparing for the day ahead. The morning sun streamed through the large windows of Esperanza, the upscale restaurant that had become the talk of the city. Customers paid premium prices to dine here, drawn by the authentic flavors and the elegant atmosphere. What they didn't know was that the woman they often mistook for kitchen staff was actually the heart and soul behind everything they experienced. Maria had learned long ago that people see what they expect to see. When she wore her simple white uniform and moved quietly through the dining room, checking on tables and ensuring everything ran smoothly, customers assumed she was just another employee. Their eyes would slide past her, focusing instead on the well-dressed managers or the charming servers who spoke perfect English without an accent. This particular morning felt different, though. Maria had received a call the night before from James Richardson, a prominent food critic whose reviews could make or break restaurants in the city. He was coming for lunch, and he was bringing investors with him. These weren't just any investors, they represented a restaurant chain that had been trying to buy out successful independent restaurants across the country. As Maria moved through her morning routine, she remembered how it all started. 20 years ago, she had arrived in this country with nothing but a handful of family recipes and a determination to succeed. She spoke broken English and had no formal business training, but she understood food in a way that went beyond recipes and techniques. Food was love, memory, and connection all mixed together. Her first job had been washing dishes in a small diner downtown. The owner, an elderly man named Frank, had noticed how she would quietly observe everything around her. She watched how the cooks prepared meals, how servers interacted with customers, how the business operated from opening to closing. When Frank noticed that customers started asking specifically for the rice and beans that Maria prepared during her breaks, he offered her a chance to work in the kitchen. Maria proved herself quickly. Her food had something special that customers couldn't quite identify but couldn't forget either. Within 2 years, she had saved enough money to rent a small space in a strip mall. She called her restaurant Esperanza, which meant hope in Spanish. It seemed fitting, since hope was all she had in those early days. The strip mall location taught her everything about running a business the hard way. She was the cook, server, cashier, and cleaning crew all rolled into one. Her English improved out of necessity, though she kept her accent. Some customers would speak slowly to her, assuming she couldn't understand, while others would compliment her food and then express surprise that someone who looked like her could create such amazing dishes. These experiences shaped how Maria approached her business as it grew. She learned to observe people carefully, to understand what they were really thinking behind their polite smiles. She discovered that many successful business people underestimated anyone who didn't look or sound like they expected a business owner to look and sound. When Esperanza outgrew the strip mall, Maria faced her first major business decision. She could expand in the same neighborhood, where she was known and accepted, or she could take a risk and move to the upscale downtown district where the real money was. Her family thought she was crazy to consider the downtown location. The rent was 3 times higher, the competition was fierce, and the customers would be completely different from what she was used to. But Maria had a plan. She had spent years watching how upscale restaurants operated, studying their menus, observing their service style, and understanding what made customers willing to pay premium prices. She knew her food was better than most of what she had tasted in expensive restaurants, but she also knew that success in the upscale market required more than just good food. The downtown location of Esperanza opened 3 years ago, and, from the first day, Maria made a deliberate choice about how she would present herself. Instead of dressing like a typical restaurant owner, she continued wearing simple kitchen clothes. When important customers or business people came in, she would let her managers handle the formal introductions and business discussions while she observed from the sidelines. This approach gave her incredible advantages. People would speak freely around her, assuming she couldn't understand or wasn't important enough to worry about. She learned about her competitors' strategies, heard customers' honest opinions about her food and service, and gained insights into the restaurant business that she never would have gotten if people had known who she really was. The staff at Esperanza knew the truth, of course, but Maria had chosen them carefully. She hired people who understood that success came from teamwork, not individual recognition. Her head chef, Roberto, had worked with her since the strip mall days. Her general manager, Sarah, had been hired because she understood both the business side of restaurants and the importance of authentic food culture. As the morning progressed and lunch preparation intensified, Maria felt the familiar mixture of excitement and nervousness that came before important events. The food critic and investors would arrive in a few hours, and their experience today could determine the future of everything she had built. Maria knew that Richardson and the investors were coming with their own assumptions. They expected to meet with a restaurant owner who looked like their idea of a successful businessperson. They probably imagined someone in an expensive suit who could discuss profit margins and expansion strategies in polished business language. They certainly weren't expecting to negotiate with someone who still wore a kitchen apron and spoke with an accent. But Maria had learned something important during her journey from dishwasher to successful restaurant owner. The people who underestimated her always made the mistake of focusing on appearances instead of results. They would look at Esperanza's packed dining room, the consistent 5-star reviews, and the steady stream of repeat customers, and they would assume someone else was responsible for that success. The lunch crowd was already starting to arrive when Maria saw the familiar figure of James Richardson entering the restaurant. He was accompanied by 3 people in expensive business suits, 2 men and 1 woman, all carrying themselves with the confidence that came from making million-dollar decisions regularly. Sarah approached their table with professional warmth, explaining that she was the general manager and would be taking care of them personally. Maria watched from the kitchen doorway as the group settled into their reserved corner table. She could see Richardson pointing out details of the restaurant's design and atmosphere to his companions. They were clearly impressed by what they saw, but Maria knew that the real test would come when they tasted the food and began discussing business seriously. The next few hours would reveal whether Maria's unconventional approach to running her business had prepared her for this moment. She had built Esperanza by being underestimated, by letting people make assumptions while she focused on creating something truly special. Now she was about to discover if that strategy would work when the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. As Maria returned to the kitchen to personally oversee the preparation of the critic's meal, she smiled quietly to herself. Richardson and the investors thought they were here to evaluate a restaurant and possibly make an acquisition offer. They had no idea they were about to discover that the person they needed to impress wasn't sitting in a corporate office somewhere. She was standing right in front of them, wearing an apron and ready to show them exactly what real success looked like. The lunch service was in full swing when Maria decided it was time to make her presence known. She had been observing Richardson and the investors for over an hour, watching how they reacted to each course, listening to their conversations, and studying their body language. What she heard confirmed everything she had suspected about their intentions. The investors weren't just interested in buying Esperanza, they wanted to strip away everything that made it special and turn it into another generic location in their chain. She heard them discussing how they could simplify the menu to reduce costs and standardize the portions for consistency across all locations. One of them even suggested that they could probably find cheaper suppliers for the ingredients and train less experienced cooks to follow basic recipes. Maria felt her jaw tighten as she listened to them casually dismiss the heart and soul of what she had built. These people saw only numbers and profit margins. They had no understanding of the relationships she had cultivated with local farmers, the years it had taken to perfect each recipe, or the way her customers had become like family to her. Richardson, to his credit, seemed to appreciate the food more than his companions. He took careful notes about each dish, asked thoughtful questions about the ingredients and preparation methods, and appeared genuinely impressed by the complexity of flavors. But, even he made assumptions about who was responsible for the restaurant's success. The food is exceptional, Richardson told the investors between courses. Whoever they have as head chef really knows what they're doing. The general manager mentioned that the recipes come from traditional family sources, which explains the authenticity. Maria almost laughed at the irony. Richardson was praising her work while assuming she was just another kitchen worker. He had even complimented Sarah on the restaurant's success, clearly believing that the young, professionally dressed general manager was the driving force behind Esperanza's achievements. As the investors continued their meal, Maria noticed that they were becoming more animated in their discussion. The woman investor, who had introduced herself as Patricia Wells from Consolidated Restaurant Group, was clearly the decision-maker of the group. She spoke with the confidence of someone accustomed to getting what she wanted, and Maria could see that she viewed Esperanza as just another acquisition target. "The location is perfect," Patricia was saying to her colleagues. "The customer base is already established, and the profit margins look healthy. We could probably close the deal within 30 days if we move quickly." Her male companions nodded in agreement. The older man, introduced as Michael Torres, added, "We'll need to meet with the owner, of course, but, from what the general manager told us, it sounds like they're a small, family-operated business. They probably don't have sophisticated legal representation or much experience with corporate negotiations." The third investor, a younger man named David Kim, was already pulling out his phone to make notes. "We should lowball the initial offer," he suggested quietly. Independent restaurant owners usually don't have accurate valuations of their businesses. They focus too much on sentimental value instead of real market worth. Maria had heard enough. She wiped her hands on her apron, smoothed her hair, and walked purposefully toward their table. As she approached, the investors glanced up at her with the polite but dismissive attention they would give to any service worker. "Excuse me," Patricia said with a slightly impatient tone. "We're having a business meeting here. Is there something you need?" Maria smiled calmly and pulled out the empty chair at their table. "Yes, actually. I understand you're interested in buying my restaurant." The confusion on their faces was immediate and almost comical. Richardson looked puzzled, clearly trying to figure out what was happening. Patricia frowned, obviously annoyed by what she perceived as an interruption from restaurant staff. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Michael said, speaking slowly as if Maria might have difficulty understanding English. "We're here to discuss business matters with the owner of this establishment." "Perfect," Maria replied, settling into her chair. "I'm Maria Santos, and I own this establishment." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria watched as the reality slowly dawned on each of their faces. Richardson's eyes widened as he realized he had been taking notes about food prepared by the woman sitting right in front of him. Patricia's professional composure slipped for just a moment, revealing her shock at the situation. David was the first to recover. "I'm sorry, I think we were expecting to meet with." He paused, clearly struggling to find a diplomatic way to express his surprise. "Someone who looks different?" Maria suggested helpfully. "Someone in a business suit, perhaps? Maybe someone who speaks without an accent?" The uncomfortable shifting around the table told Maria everything she needed to know about their assumptions. Richardson cleared his throat and attempted to regain his professional composure. "Miss Santos, I apologize for any confusion. Your restaurant is absolutely exceptional, and we're honored to have this opportunity to speak with you directly." Maria appreciated his attempt at professionalism, but she could see that the investors were still processing the situation. Patricia had recovered from her initial shock and was now studying Maria with the calculating gaze of someone trying to reassess a business opponent. "Miss Santos," Patricia began, her tone now carefully neutral. "We represent Consolidated Restaurant Group, and we've been very impressed with what we've seen today. We'd like to discuss the possibility of bringing Esperanza into our family of restaurants." "I'm listening," Maria replied simply, though she already knew exactly where this conversation was heading. Michael leaned forward, sliding smoothly into what was obviously a practiced pitch. "We specialize in helping successful independent restaurants expand their reach and maximize their potential. We have the resources to open multiple Esperanza locations across the country, bringing your wonderful food to thousands of new customers. Maria nodded thoughtfully. That sounds interesting. Tell me more about how this process works. For the next 20 minutes, she listened as the investors outlined their standard acquisition strategy. They spoke about market penetration, operational efficiency, and brand standardization. They promised her financial security and the chance to see her restaurant concept spread nationwide. What they described sounded professional and potentially lucrative, but Maria recognized it for what it really was. They wanted to buy the Esperanza name and then strip away everything that made it special. Their vision involved replacing her carefully sourced ingredients with cheaper alternatives, simplifying her complex recipes into dishes that could be prepared by inexperienced cooks, and turning her intimate restaurant into a cookie-cutter operation that could be replicated anywhere. It sounds like you have a very systematic approach, Maria said when they finished their presentation. But I'm curious about something. You mentioned standardization several times. What exactly would that mean for Esperanza's menu? Patricia's smile became slightly strained. Well, naturally we'd need to make some adjustments to ensure consistency across all locations. Some of your current recipes might be too complex for efficient large-scale production. I see, Maria said. And what about the ingredients? I work with specific local suppliers who provide the freshest produce and highest quality meats. Would those relationships continue? David jumped in to answer. We have established supply chains that allow us to purchase ingredients at much better prices. It's one of the advantages of our size and scale. Maria nodded again, but inside she was becoming increasingly irritated. These people had walked into her restaurant, eaten her food, and were now calmly explaining how they planned to destroy everything she had spent 20 years building. Let me ask you something else, she said, leaning back in her chair. When you were eating lunch today, what did you think made the food special? Richardson, who had been largely quiet during the business discussion, spoke up immediately. The authenticity was remarkable. Every dish had depth and complexity that you rarely find, even in high-end restaurants. The flavors were perfectly balanced, and you could tell that each recipe had been developed over years of refinement. Exactly, Maria smiled. And do you think those qualities would survive your standardization process? The investors exchanged glances, clearly realizing that Maria was more sophisticated than they had initially assumed. Patricia attempted to regain control of the conversation. Ms. Santos, I understand your concerns about maintaining quality. But you have to understand that growth requires certain compromises. The trade-off is worth it when you consider the financial returns and the opportunity to share your food with a much larger audience. Maria stood up slowly, her decision already made. But she wasn't quite finished with this conversation yet. She had learned valuable lessons during her years of being underestimated, and one of those lessons was that people often revealed their true nature when they thought they were in a position of power. I appreciate your interest in Esperanza, she said calmly. But I think we have very different ideas about what success looks like. You see a business model to be replicated. I see a legacy to be protected. The investors looked surprised by her firm tone, but Patricia wasn't ready to give up yet. Ms. Santos, perhaps we got off on the wrong foot. We're prepared to make a very generous offer for your restaurant. I think you'll find our terms quite attractive. Maria smiled, but there was steel in her voice when she replied. Ms. Wells, I think you're still making the same mistake you made when you walked in here today. You're assuming that I don't understand the value of what I've built. But I've been watching and listening to you for the past 2 hours, and I know exactly what you're offering and what it would mean for my restaurant. The investors were clearly taken aback by her directness. They had come expecting to negotiate with someone they could easily manipulate, and instead they had found a business owner who understood their strategy better than they had expected. Richardson looked genuinely curious now. Ms. Santos, what would it take for you to consider expansion? Surely you've thought about growing your business. Maria looked around her restaurant, taking in the satisfied customers, the efficient staff, and the atmosphere of warmth and authenticity that couldn't be replicated through corporate formulas. "Mr. Richardson," she said finally, "growth and expansion aren't the same thing as success. I've been successful for 20 years by focusing on quality, relationships, and staying true to what makes Esperanza special. Your colleagues want to trade all of that for rapid expansion and higher profit margins." She paused, making sure she had their full attention. "But here's what you still don't understand. I didn't build this restaurant so I could sell it to the highest bidder. I built it to create something meaningful and lasting. And that's not for sale." The lunch meeting was about to take an unexpected turn, and Maria was ready to show these investors exactly what happened when someone truly understood the value of what they had created. The tension at the table was palpable as Maria's words sank in. Patricia's professional mask slipped completely, revealing the calculating business executive underneath. She wasn't accustomed to being turned down, especially by someone she had initially dismissed as unsophisticated. "Ms. Santos," Patricia said, her voice taking on a harder edge, "I think you're making an emotional decision instead of a practical one. Independent restaurants have a 90% failure rate within 5 years. We're offering you security and the chance to retire comfortably." Maria laughed, a sound that surprised everyone at the table. "Ms. Wells, do you know how long Esperanza has been successful? Do you know what our profit margins actually are, or how much this building is worth, or what our customer retention rate looks like?" The investors exchanged uncomfortable glances. It was clear they had done only surface-level research, assuming that a restaurant owned by someone who looked like Maria couldn't be too sophisticated in its operations. "Let me share some numbers with you," Maria continued, pulling out her phone and opening a financial app. "Last year, Esperanza generated $2.3 million in revenue with a net profit margin of 18%. We own this building outright, valued at $1.8 million. Our customer retention rate is 87%, and we have a waiting list for reservations that extends 6 weeks out." She paused to let those numbers sink in before continuing. "We have zero debt, full staff benefits, and I pay my employees 20% above market rate. So tell me again about security and practical decisions." Richardson looked genuinely impressed, but the investors were clearly rattled. David was frantically taking notes, probably realizing that their initial offer would have been insultingly low. Michael cleared his throat and attempted to salvage the situation. "Those are impressive numbers, Ms. Santos. Perhaps we underestimated the scope of your operation. We'd be happy to revise our offer to reflect the true value of your business." "Would you?" Maria asked. "And what would that revised offer look like?" "Because I'm curious to know what you think 20 years of my life, my reputation, my relationships with customers and suppliers, and my family's recipes are worth in dollar terms." Patricia leaned forward, sensing an opportunity. "We're prepared to offer $4 million for the restaurant, including the building and all operational assets. That's significantly above market value for a single location." Maria shook her head. "You still don't get it. You're trying to buy something that isn't for sale. But let me tell you what is available, if you're genuinely interested in working with Esperanza." She had their full attention now. Even Richardson was leaning forward, curious about what she was going to propose. "I've been thinking about expansion for the past 2 years, Maria said. "Not the kind of expansion you're talking about, where you strip away authenticity to achieve scale. I'm talking about controlled growth that maintains the quality and values that make Esperanza special." She stood up and walked to the window overlooking the busy street. "See that empty storefront across the street? I've been negotiating to purchase it for 6 months. My plan is to open a second location that will serve as a culinary school and catering operation." Maria turned back to the table. The school would teach authentic cooking techniques to professional chefs, while the catering operation would bring Esperanza's food to private events and corporate clients. Both would maintain our standards while expanding our reach in a sustainable way. The investors looked intrigued despite themselves. This wasn't the simple acquisition they had planned, but it represented a different kind of opportunity. "That sounds ambitious," Patricia said carefully. "But it would require significant capital investment and expertise in areas outside of restaurant operations." "Exactly," Maria smiled. Which is why I might be interested in partners who could provide capital and business expertise while respecting the vision and values that make Esperanza successful. She sat back down and looked directly at each of them. But here's the difference between what I'm offering and what you proposed. I would remain the majority owner and have final decision-making authority over all operations. My recipes, my suppliers, my staff, and my standards would remain unchanged. Partners would provide capital and business support, not operational control. Richardson was taking notes rapidly now. What kind of partnership structure are you envisioning? Maria had clearly thought this through carefully. I would be willing to accept minority partners for the expansion projects only. The original Esperanza would remain 100% mine. Partners would receive returns based on the success of the new ventures, but would have no ownership stake in the existing restaurant. David looked confused. But that's not how acquisitions typically work. We're in the business of buying established restaurants, not funding expansion projects with limited ownership. Then, we don't have a deal, Maria said simply. Because I'm not interested in selling what I've built. I'm only interested in growing it on my terms. Patricia sat back in her chair, studying Maria with new respect. You've clearly given this considerable thought. What makes you think your approach would be more successful than our proven model? Maria gestured around the busy restaurant. Look around you, Ms. Wells. Every customer in this room chose to eat here because of something unique that they can't get anywhere else. They're not coming for standardized food at competitive prices. They're coming for an experience that can only happen at Esperanza. She leaned forward, her voice becoming more passionate. Your model works for fast casual dining and chain restaurants. But Esperanza isn't competing in that market. We're competing in the market for authentic, high-quality experiences. And, in that market, authenticity can't be faked or mass-produced. Michael looked skeptical. But surely there are limits to how much you can charge, regardless of quality. Price sensitivity affects every business. Maria smiled. Mr. Torres, what did you pay for lunch today? Michael glanced at the menu. I believe the tasting menu was $68 per person. And how long did you wait for your table? About 20 minutes, even though we had a reservation. Exactly, Maria said. We charge premium prices, we're booked solid, and people wait because they know the experience is worth it. That's not something you can achieve through standardization and cost-cutting. Richardson had been quiet during this exchange, but now he spoke up. Ms. Santos, what you're describing sounds like you want to create a different kind of restaurant group. Instead of standardization, you'd be expanding through controlled replication of quality and authenticity. That's exactly right, Maria nodded. Each location would need to maintain the same standards, but they could adapt to local tastes and ingredients while preserving the core values that make Esperanza special. Patricia was clearly intrigued despite her initial resistance. It's an interesting model, but it would be much more expensive and complex than our usual approach. The return on investment would be slower and less predictable. But it would also be more sustainable and more defensible against competition, Maria countered. When you create something truly special, customers become loyal in ways that go beyond price comparison. The investors spent the next few minutes discussing logistics and financial projections. Maria listened patiently, but she could see that they were struggling to adapt their corporate mindset to her vision. They were accustomed to quick acquisitions and rapid scaling, not the careful, relationship-based approach that Maria was proposing. Finally, Patricia spoke up. Ms. Santos, your proposal is certainly unique, and we can see the logic behind it. But it would require us to completely change our business model for this partnership. I'm not sure our board would approve such a departure from our established practices. Maria nodded, unsurprised by their response. I understand. Change is difficult, especially when your current approach has been successful. But I want you to consider something. She stood up again, preparing to deliver her final point. You came here today expecting to buy a restaurant from someone you thought would be easy to negotiate with. Instead, you discovered that the person you underestimated has built something more valuable and sophisticated than you realized. Maria paused, making sure she had their complete attention. Now you have a choice. You can walk away and continue doing business the way you always have, acquiring restaurants from owners who don't understand their true value. Or you can partner with someone who does understand value and learn a different way to succeed in this business. Richardson was clearly fascinated by the entire exchange. Ms. Santos, regardless of what happens with the potential partnership, I hope you know that today has been educational for all of us. You've challenged assumptions that I think we all carried into this meeting. That was my intention, Maria smiled. I've spent 20 years being underestimated, and I've learned that people's assumptions often reveal more about them than about me. Patricia gathered her papers and stood up. Ms. Santos, we'll need to discuss this internally and get back to you. Your proposal would require board approval and a significant shift in our investment strategy. I understand, Maria replied. But let me be clear about one thing. This offer won't remain open indefinitely. I have other investors who are interested in the expansion project, and I don't need to partner with anyone to succeed. I'm offering you an opportunity because I think it could benefit both of us, not because I need what you're offering. As the investors prepared to leave, David turned back to Maria. I have to ask, when we first sat down, did you already know who we were and why we were here? Maria's smile was enigmatic. Mr. Kim, I've been running this restaurant for 3 years. Do you really think I don't pay attention to who makes reservations, especially when they're accompanied by the city's most prominent food critic? The investors exchanged glances, finally, understanding that they had been observed and evaluated just as carefully as they thought they had been observing and evaluating the restaurant. Richardson shook Maria's hand as he prepared to leave. Ms. Santos, this has been one of the most interesting restaurant visits I've ever had. Regardless of what happens with the business discussions, you can expect a very positive review. After the group left, Maria returned to the kitchen where her staff was waiting anxiously to hear what had happened. Roberto, her head chef, was the first to speak. So, did you sell the restaurant to those corporate people? Maria laughed and shook her head. Roberto, do you really think I spent 20 years building Esperanza just to hand it over to people who would turn it into another chain restaurant? Then, what was that meeting about? Sarah asked. It was about showing some very smart business people that their assumptions can be expensive mistakes, Maria replied. And it was about exploring whether there might be a way to grow Esperanza without losing what makes it special. 3 weeks later, Maria received a call from Patricia Wells. Consolidated Restaurant Group had decided to pass on the partnership opportunity, explaining that it was too different from their usual business model. But Patricia had a different proposal. She was leaving the corporate world to start her own investment firm focused on partnering with authentic, owner-operated restaurants. I've been thinking about what you said, Patricia told Maria. About the difference between growth and expansion, and about the value of authenticity. I think you're right that there's a market for a different approach to restaurant investment. 6 months later, Maria opened her culinary school in the storefront across the street. The school was funded through a partnership with Patricia's new investment firm, and it maintained all the values and standards that made Esperanza successful. Applications came from professional chefs around the world who wanted to learn authentic techniques that couldn't be found in corporate training programs. The catering operation followed 6 months after that, bringing Esperanza's food to events throughout the city while maintaining the same quality and attention to detail that characterized the original restaurant. Maria never did sell Esperanza, but she proved that there were ways to grow and expand without compromising the authenticity and quality that made her business special. More importantly, she demonstrated that being underestimated could be an advantage, as long as you were prepared to surprise people when it mattered most. Today, when new investors or business people visit Esperanza, they usually ask to meet with the owner right away. Word has gotten around that the woman in the simple uniform might just be the person they need to impress. But Maria still enjoys the occasional opportunity to surprise someone who makes assumptions based on appearances. After all, 20 years of being underestimated had taught her that the most valuable lessons often come from the people you least expect to teach them.